Autoline This Week is underwritten in part by...
In this epic battle of fuel efficiency and endurance, we're here to see which hybrid has the best MPG.
That's the essence of a hybrid soul. But is there more to it?
The Hybrid Game MPG Challenge.
And now, here is your host, John McElroy.
I want to thank you all for joining us on Autoline This Week, where the topic today is all about leasing. Should you lease or should you buy? And what's going on with this leasing thing in the automotive industry? I've got three experts in to talk about it today, including Sam Slaughter, the owner of Sellers Buick GMC with 3 stores in the Detroit metro area, Jeff Robinson, the Vice President of Marketing for Mercedes-Benz Financial Services, and Scott Hall, the Executive Vice President of a company called Swap-A-Lease. I want to thank you all here for joining us on Autoline This Week.
Thanks for having us.
Glad to be here.
Thank you. Sam, let me start with you. You're down in the trenches. You've got these stores. What's going on with leasing? Are more people getting interested in it or not? Or you tell me.
Well, I think more people are definitely getting interested in leasing. It's sort of the get your cake and eat it too. You get to drive a new car. You're always under warranty. You know exactly what your expenses are going to be. And so, leasing used to be sort of a rich person's game, and now it really works well for people who are on a budget as well.
But it's not a gift to the consumer. It's not a cheaper way of buying cars, right? It's a different way of getting a car.
It's definitely a different way. If you're going to buy a car and drive it for 10 years, that's probably cheaper than leasing a car every 3 years. But it is a more level way. What happens when you have a 6 or 7 year old car is you have these oopses that happen, where if you're leasing a car and your payment is X dollars a month, that's your payment until you turn it back in.
And, Sam, if I could jump in on that, I support exactly what you're saying as well. We've certainly seen that the growth in the luxury car segment on the leasing side. We've seen consistent growth, and it's become a very important part of what we do and how we market. And to Sam's point, you can have your cake and eat it here. We can reflect directly into the leasing payment the value that we see in the resale value of the vehicle. So it creates the affordability and accessibility for many of the customers. I think that's why it continues to be so popular. And it's seen as well with the very good interest rates that we have in the market at the moment that we can aggressively market across a range of products.
Jeff, what percentage of Mercedes-Benz customers lease? I've got to believe, just to Sam's point, luxury buyers are more likely to be in and out of the market every 2 to 3 years or so. I got to believe it's higher than the average industry.
Yeah, absolutely. We're in the high 50s, and we've been consistently over the 50% mark. Even when we saw the leasing market dip slightly around 2009, for us, we're still over the 50% range. And I think you hit on a really good point. In the luxury car market, for us, one of the things that we're really wanting to present to customers is flexibility with all the new models that we have coming out, and leasing serves that perfectly well. We see, if we look at the average term that we have on a lease, a 3-year lease, we only see 50% of those leases actually running their course because customers choose to come out and take advantage of the flexible options that we have.
Okay, that's a perfect segue to get into Scott Hall with this company, Swap-A-Lease, which I'm fascinated by. You can swap leases? Explain what this is about.
Yes, what we've done is we've created a marketplace where one can come to get out of their lease and one can come to get into a short-term lease as well. Obviously, we need both sides of the equation for our marketplace to work well. I would like to add on to what these gentlemen have said. Not only does leasing provide a great deal of flexibility for your automotive consumer, but something that we've really noticed recently from some of the surveys that we've done at swapalease.com and really getting good feedback from our users is the technology involved in cars is really pushing people to want to get out of those leases sooner and get into the new vehicle. I like to use the example, if you go back 2 or 3 years and use some of the navigation systems that have been out there, it's almost like playing Pong way back when, where if you get into a brand new vehicle, a 2014 model in many cases, you move all the way up to Xbox all of a sudden. And that's just one example of the technology benefits and one of the drivers of why people like to have that flexibility in leasing.
So walk me through that a little bit. I've got a lease and I think, I can't afford these car payments. Or, boy, I can easily afford these car payments. In fact, I just got a raise. I can step into something nicer. Is that what's going on? People are coming in and swapping for a different car?
Well, actually, you just hit on both sides. We actually have two major buckets where our clients come from. One is due to financial reasons. The other is due to lifestyle changes. So typically in the financial bucket, you have people that may not necessarily have lost their job, but maybe they've been downsized, maybe they've taken some sort of a pay cut. On the other side of the equation, the lifestyle changes, I like to use the example of a young couple driving a Corvette convertible and they learn that they have a baby on the way. That car is just not going to work anymore. So that gives them a great example to get out of that car early, not spend a lot of extra money and pain of getting out of that lease, and permit them to get into something new and different that better suits their needs.
Sam, though, you said you're seeing more buyers in the middle or lower, not luxury buyers, coming in and being more interested in leasing. What's driving that thought?
Well, I think it's a budget thing. When people get into financial trouble, they get to a point where they really need to know exactly what their expenses are. And when you have a $900 repair bill on an 8-year-old car with 90,000 miles on it, that's an oops that's just too tough for some families to swallow. So they sort of look at their car expense and say, well, if I can get into the right car at $230 a month, and I know that's going to be my payment going forward, that just helps people budget and kind of takes the surprise out of car ownership.
Do you see people coming in, as Scott mentioned, they want the latest technology, so they want to step into a new lease?
No question about it. The technology piece is a huge driver on people switching vehicles. They might go rent a car and come back and say, hey, my car had this GPS thing on it that was really good, and they want it. And it's funny, just being in the business for as long as I have, so I drive a new car most of the time, but I'll get into a 3 or 4 year old car just to see what's on the used car lot, and I'm like, oh, I can't sync my Bluetooth phone. It's like it's like going to play Pong. It's just, It's not right. So definitely a driver.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, you mentioned that half your leases do not even go to the end of the lease. People come in and get a new one. Shouldn't you be writing up shorter leases for these people? Why do they go with the longer one?
Well, I think one of the benefits is the fact that we've got new models coming out all of the time, and for us, creating positive touch points with customers, which we do, and a lease enables, because we know that customers are going to bring the vehicles back, and we know when the vehicles are going to come back. We've got the opportunity to share what the latest technology is, what the new model upgrades are, so it gives us the chance to pre-market to customers, and everybody likes to have the chance to have the latest, greatest technology. So that's one of the reasons why they don't run the full term. People choose, and I think it goes back to flexibility. We like to give customers the choice, and if they choose to come out early, that's great, and we have another lease for them. If they want to remain the term or even go longer, we can do that. So that's why I think leasing provides so many of the different flexible options that now for customers, it just gives a greater range of choice.
I've got to believe that automakers and dealers love leases because you know when it's going to end, and you know the customer's got to come back to your store.
It really goes to the customer experience piece that we all are working very hard on, no matter what the manufacturer. But when you have a great relationship with a customer and you've been selling cars to a family for generations, having them in leases gives you a certain amount of, I wouldn't say control, but knowledge about what's happening in their life. Because if you buy a car and finance it for 5 years, you're not necessarily trading it when you end up at the end of 5 years. When you have a 3-year lease, something's happening. Yeah. Right. And so we spend a lot of time and effort taking care of the customer and service while they have their lease with free oil changes and whatever we do in that arena. But every time they're in, we're showing them the latest technology. We're giving them a loaner of the newest vehicle, and it's a much more customer-focused way of keeping people in your dealership and for a manufacturer in the manufacturer fold.
I would support that. I mean, our numbers show that from a loyalty point of view, we have between a 10 to 15% increase on loyalty for customers that we have in a lease than we have in a retail finance contract. And for all the reasons Sam says, the regular contact, we know the vehicles that are being serviced regularly, taken into the dealership. So we have many opportunities to have the dialogue with customers and get the chance to get them into a new vehicle and provide also, just a great customer experience, which I think shows in the loyalty numbers.
Scott, I've got to believe Swap-A-Lease is kind of a disruptive service in that regard, right? Because people are
actually, I would mirror what you're saying. Is what we find was when somebody wants out of a particular make lease, that they often want to go back into that lease, possibly a different model. But it's very common to have that loyalty to that particular make.
But does the dealership lose contact with that customer if they're swapping for a lease that takes them to another dealership?
Well, in some instances that is the case, but the way we like to look at it is not only do they have a customer they can market to that just successfully exited a lease, that may very well need a vehicle, but they also have a new customer that's in that stream as well that they can market to not only at that point from a service standpoint, from a parts standpoint, but due to the short-term nature of taking over a lease, will actually need a new vehicle before too long.
Well, and Jeff makes it sound easy to just take these people out of leases, but you have to worry about what the trade-in value is and how much money they might owe for over mileage. And if they're, one of the big reasons for changing a lease is if you contract for 15,000 miles a year, you get a job across town and now you're driving 20,000 miles a year, you run out of miles. And so we oftentimes will, if we can't make that happen for a customer, we'll recommend that they go to Swap-A-Lease because they can do a one-sided transaction. So if they're looking at a new Buick on my lot and they want to get rid of the Buick they're driving and for whatever reason the numbers don't work, oftentimes there's a customer out there looking for 2-month lease and we'll pick up that lease and then I can sell them the new car.
Very interesting. Yeah.
I mean, one of the things I would add to it is I think what leasing provides is just the opportunity for lots of dialogue with customers. Right. If family situations change, mileage changes, then as a leasing provider, you've got to be able to accommodate that flexibility. So whether it means buying more miles for somebody, whether it means changing the lease, closing out the lease, looking at bringing forward the end of the lease, all of those things, or even extending it. I think when you get into the leasing business, whilst you have all of the flexibility up front and the benefits for customers, you need to be able to make sure that you can deliver the service back end to ensure that really is a great customer experience.
Analogy I would like to use is I'm kind of seeing leasing moving towards the idea of having a cell phone plan. And at first that may sound a little bit ridiculous, but what I mean by that, I think more and more consumers, and I think this is proven by what Sam has said, by leasing becoming more prevalent in the lower and medium makes as opposed to just the luxury makes. But people are becoming accustomed to having that monthly expense. They want to have the latest and greatest technology, is what we've hit on before. They want that flexibility in case their job changes from where they are so they can get into a different lease perhaps if they need more miles and what have you. And the younger generation in general, and as a society as a whole, we're actually driving less mileage, which is kind of taking off one of the reasons that people have used for not leasing in the past. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fuel prices and what have you. I mean, there's many factors involved. But I envision a time where, and not too far off in the future, frankly, where leasing is similar to, a cell phone plan that I can make the adjustments that I need. In 3 years, I know I'm going to go get the nicer option. And I think it's a great analogy for the car business at this point.
Describe for me the typical Swap-A-Lease customer, or is there a typical Swap-A-Lease customer?
Well, I'll tell you what, we see people from all over the place. We do have a nationwide footprint at Swap-A-Lease. Again, we really have those two large buckets of people that need out for financial reasons and people that just have some sort of a lifestyle change. And within those buckets, there's all sorts of different examples of what people are doing. We're based in Cincinnati, Ohio, and the home of Procter & Gamble, and it's not uncommon for us to get a call from a Procter & Gamble executive who needs to get out of their lease, whatever type of lease it may be, because they're being transferred overseas to run a new division. And in that case, when that manufacturer lets them out of that lease easily, and we're able to find them a client to take that lease over, when they come back, they've really got a good feeling, hey, I'm going to show some loyalty because they took care of me in the past.
Jeff, we've been talking all about passenger cars here, but Mercedes-Benz, of course, has Freightliner trucks and Thomas-built bus. Yeah. And are you involved in that, and is leasing a part of that business? Leasing,
first of all, yeah, I have been involved in that. I've been in the group for the last 23 years, and some of that's been on the truck side. It's very much part of the overall business. It's a slightly different concept, though, for the major over-the-road freight companies. They're not so much looking for a closed-end lease, a walkaway lease. They like to have a lot more control over how they dispose of their trucks, how they run them. So it's a slightly different different business model. But nevertheless, some of the basic principles are the same, in that you need to understand really what customers are wanting, provide the flexibility in what we do offer, but the more finance-related leases rather than the walkaway lease that we see on the car side. Nevertheless, very important for us, helps ensure that we support all of the different brands that we have, and certainly the demand has remained consistent over the last few years as well.
And
well, I was just going to say, it's sort of interesting. You ask about the big trucks, and we sell medium-duty trucks, so most of the box trucks you see driving around are also leased, and that's really the origin of leasing. The origin of leasing was never a passenger car for you and me to drive to work. It was the commercial side, because they didn't want it on their balance sheet and they wanted this flexibility. And so we really, in the probably late 70s, the car companies started picking up on this idea of, let's see if the consumer could do this. And at first the consumer was saying, heck no, why would we do that? And so it's just interesting that really is the origin of the whole concept of leasing.
Is this still a learning process for the consumer out there? To your point, leasing's been around a long time. It was highly controversial when it hit the retail side of the passenger car segment. Right. Now, Jeff, you're saying 50% of your customers are. Is it still something the car buying public is not quite familiar with yet?
I think you still get that basic question, don't you, from consumers, whether is it better for me to lease or to own? And it's a very personal decision. And I think really the only thing to do is lay out the benefits, the pros and cons for both, and let people evaluate. So I think, there's still education and training needs to be a constant part of how we present products to consumers. But I think there's a higher degree of confidence now that if I rewind back a number of years, I think there's a higher degree of confidence in leasing as a product and the flexibility that leasing can provide. As people now are into their second or third lease, I think by and large they've had a good experience. We can see from the loyalty and retention figures they must feel generally comfortable with the product.
I think, Scott, to your point on the cell phone contract, it is a little bit of a generational thing. Younger people, older people tend to have this, you can't buy it until you can afford it, and even financing a car is a little rough for them. Lease a car, forget it. You never would. Mm-hmm. But, these kids who have grown up with cell phone contracts and, disposable iPads and some of these things, to them, it's much more a commodity than buying the old family sedan and driving it for a long time.
I think that's a key point. They're very aware now, looking at the generations coming through buying vehicles, they're very aware of not just what's available now, but what's coming down the line. So I think one of the drivers and one of the things we certainly think about when we're marketing is thinking about how can we give them the assurance that they're not locked in for a period of time that takes them beyond where they want to be, and they have the chance to get the latest technology, which is increasingly part of their decisioning.
Speaking of the latest technology, there's some question marks associated with some of it. Electric cars, for example, haven't really caught the world by fire because I think a lot of consumers are wary about what the battery technology might be from a longevity standpoint. I got to believe leasing is perfect for these new technologies because after 2 or 3 years you can just walk away from it even if it doesn't work that well.
No question.
I think you hit on a great point. I'll give you just some feedback from the marketing that we have in Germany and also recently in the US. Part of the Mercedes-Benz and Daimler group, we have Smart as well. And within Smart, we've launched a product which is a leasing product. It's a Battery Assurance Plus, and we will lease the chassis, but then we'll provide a rental agreement on the battery itself, because for exactly what the point that you make, John, which is consumers thinking about how long is this battery going to last? Am I going to have any problems in it? They want that peace of mind and certainty, and so having the leasing and an assurance contract on the battery provides that for them. They have no concern about when they sell the vehicle or if they have any problems with the battery. We just completely replace it.
I've got to believe too that all this leasing, Mercedes-Benz Financial Services, got to be a nice profit center for the company as well.
Well, I think for us, we always play the long game. Our approach is as a captive finance company. We want to take care of customers and have repeated loyalty. So for us, that's the primary driver. of course, we're trying to ensure that customers get a good experience, and along the way, we are a profit-making organisation. That's clear. We wouldn't do it to the extent that we did it if it was a loss-making situation for us. But you have to play the long game. There are dips and cycles within both the car market and the truck market where you're going to take a residual value loss. You're forecasting out the value of the vehicle, 4 or 5 years down the line, and you can't be too reactive. You've got to see this. This is one of our standard product portfolios that we have to offer, and so with that in mind, we play the long game on it.
You said something earlier, John. It's not really leasing isn't a gift to the consumer. It's still the car still costs $30,000 or whatever it might be. It's really not a gift to the dealer or the manufacturer either. It's simply a different way to go to market and give that customer the flexibility they want. And part of the job that we do is we set out the comparison. Okay, here's the exact same car. Here's the lease payment. Here's the purchase payment. Here's what it might be worth when you come back. And it really gets down to the consumer need and comfort level.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree with what Sam's saying on that. Is all leasing is at the end of the day is an alternative form of financing a vehicle.
Right.
It's nothing more than that. And of course, in my opinion, I'm somewhat biased. It does offer a lot more flexibility, and of course, the ability to transfer a lease even offers greater flexibility above and beyond your typical leasing.
Now, does Swap Lease have its own captive finance, or are you able to just get away with swapping paper between different buyers?
What we do is we're essentially a matchmaker at the end of the day. You can almost think of us as a dating service for leases. As something
some people dating services. I like this business.
I like to bring my analogies in from outside the industry. But that being said, one thing that's very important to Swap Lease is we want to make sure that the customer wanting out and the customer wanting in follow the rules, guidelines, and procedures of each of the leasing companies to a T, and make sure that they transfer that lease correctly, and that way nobody puts themselves in harm's way.
We talked earlier about still a lot of consumers out there who haven't learned a whole lot about leasing. I got to imagine with Swap-A-Lease, which is even newer still to the game, there's even more education.
Well, you hit the nail on the head. One of the biggest things we have, and we've been at this nearly 13 years at this point, and when I say I do lease transferring, they're like, it get kind of a double check, and what does that mean? And really, it's been around essentially as long as leasing, just most people aren't aware of this clause in their lease contract that generally will permit them to transfer that lease to somebody else. So, yeah, not only are we still educating about people about leases, which I agree with these guys, it's less and less as we move forward, but the lease transfer piece there's definitely an education piece there.
Without leasing, too, you can really be stranded, can't you? I'm thinking back, Scott, Sam, just a few years ago when General Motors lost GMAC, and just coming out of bankruptcy, it was not able to do any leasing, and that really seemed to hurt the company.
Oh, it definitely did. Leasing, make no mistake about it, it's a very important piece of the whole retail spectrum of financing that we offer, and when you took that one away, it really hurt. Now, how much did that hurt versus the whole economy and where it was? I don't know, because we weren't selling many either, but definitely did hurt.
I'd say that Buick in particular has done an outstanding job getting into the leasing business post-recession.
Yeah.
The last numbers I saw, it was 37% lease penetration, and for a middle line maker, a near luxury maker, that's outstanding, and it's going to really pay dividends for them in the next couple of years.
How's that stand up against the other General Motors brands, GMC, Cadillac, Chevrolet?
Buick, I don't know technically the numbers. I would guess Cadillac is probably up there, but Buick has definitely made a big increase. I think we're at 14% 3 years ago, and now we're at 36% across the nation. Now there are a lot of lease markets, and there's some markets where you can't lease anything. So to change that globally or nationally by that amount is significant. Really, it was the luxury piece that Buick decided that we really needed to go after, because the luxury brands are much higher as a percentage of leasing than the traditional non-luxury brands, and Buick is really making this play to be the luxury alternative. And
is it just that as Buick moves upscale, or are you just coming off a very low base of the 14%?
No. It was an initiative. It's called the Experience Buick Lease. It's a specific 2-year lease, includes OnStar and XM radio, and it was designed really to be like a 2-year test drive. Come try this Buick. And I'm telling you, people are just eating it up.
How interesting. So you're packaging not just the lease, but other things like OnStar along with it. And
we threw in a courtesy transportation. So when you bring your Buick in for an oil change, you get a car to drive, and you get a Buick. You don't get some rental car. So it's really all sort of this customer experience piece that Buick really went after. And if we're going to compete as a luxury brand, then we need to have the leasing component to go with it.
Do you have to pretty up your leases to get people to take them?
It sounds like it. We've got to be on our toes, haven't we, always for the competition. But I'd support what Sam's saying about the luxury car market. When we look at our direct competitors, and Sam, obviously we see the Buick there as well. But when we look at BMW and Audi and Lexus, for all of them, their representation in the leasing sector is high, around the 50% plus. So I think it's definitely important in that market.
It is. Yeah.
I think Buick really, well, GM in general, I think really did their homework on this, because in the past, these luxury makers that you just mentioned have added additional things in, such as the maintenance, for even more peace of mind than just having that warranty on that car. And I think Buick really did their homework and put together that 2-year lease that you were noting, Sam. And I know that the buyers on swap lease, the general feedback we get when they realize, hey, XM's included, OnStar's included, maintenance is included, that just takes all the negatives out of taking over a lease.
I might go shopping after the show the way you're talking. I love all this. Real quick, because we're down to the very end here. Who else besides Buick do you think is doing a great job in leasing?
Well, I'm not trying to pander, but Mercedes-Benz is doing an excellent job.
Thanks, Scott.
Really, BMW does a great job as well. I want to hand it to GM. I think they've really, they've done remarkable things since the restructuring. And with leasing moving the direction it is, I believe that there'll be a lot of other manufacturers that'll be right there along with everybody else in the very near future.
We're going to have to wrap it up. Fascinating discussion. We really want to thank all of you for coming in. Sam Slaughter, Jeff Robinson, Scott Hall. A very interesting conversation. I've learned a lot here today. I hope you've learned a lot as well. And thanks so much for tuning in to Autoline This Week.
Autoline This Week is underwritten in part by
In this epic battle of fuel efficiency and endurance, we're here to see which hybrid has the best MPG.
That's the essence of a hybrid soul. But is there more to it?
The Hybrid Game MPG Challenge.